Welcome to the Real Estate Crowdfunding Show, syndication in the digital age at gowercrowd.com. Adam Gower here, and my guest today, President of Jamestown, Michael Phillips and I, are going to be talking about how he sets about marketing Jamestown Invest, the division of Jamestown that is raising capital online from both accredited and non-accredited investors. Jamestown, as you know, is a vast real estate company with over 35 years track record, almost as long as mine, and some $12 billion of assets under management. Also, just slightly more than I have. Now, fascinating to me when talking to a chap like Michael Phillips is not just the scale and why they chose crowdfunding, but how they address the challenge of marketing their deals online. Right? How do they do that? Well, what you're going to learn today is that it doesn't really matter how big or small your real estate company. The same digital content marketing methods are just as effective, and the same exact systems work for everyone. For example, if you want to raise money online without contravening any of the securities laws, right? It's remarkable how many people just don't realize you can do this yet or how to do it. By building a world-class investor acquisition system and loading it up with vast amounts of entertaining, high-value educational content so you can teach your prospects about the world of real estate without even soliciting them, strictly educational content, then the way to do that is to go to the podcast page for today's episode and watch the whiteboard workshop I've put together for you, where I show you in detail how it works and exactly how to do it. That is all on the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com. Now, in some ways, being as big as Jamestown can have its disadvantages. They have to jump through hoops that you may not have to. For example, even though we are only discussing marketing and investor education during this podcast, I have to alert you to the following CYA. Okay, hang on, I've been practicing this. Here we go. Securities offered through North Capital Private Securities Corporate Member FINRA SIPC Jamestown's portfolio projects. It's not representative of Jamestown Invest One's investment strategy and the scale of investments the fund intends to make. Investment in Jamestown Invest is illiquid, involves substantial risk, and there is potential for loss of part or all of investment capital. Visit www.jamestowninvest.com/OC for more information and full offering statement. Oh, I'm exhausted. I had to stand on tiptoes to do that. Now, be sure to listen to the full normal speed version at the end of this podcast, as it does, in all seriousness, apply to everything you're going to hear today. All right, enough said. I'm delighted now to introduce you to the president of Jamestown as we discuss Jamestown Invest, Mr. Michael Phillips. Michael, thank you so much for being on my podcast. You run one of the largest real estate firms in the world and are now raising money online from what I call retail investors, accredited investors online, which of course begs the question, when you have access to so much institutional capital firepower, why on earth would you choose to start to raise money online from accredited investors?
Well, pleasure. Thank you. You're generous. I wouldn't say we're one of the largest, but I certainly, we have our share. I think for us, our history for 37 years has been raising closed-end funds from retail investors in Germany. So doctors and lawyers and nurses and usually through intermediaries and banks. And so we've now been doing that successfully for a long time and have won awards for that and have a great reputation in that space. In addition, we have an institutional fund business, which, as you say, institutional capital. But as we look at investors' sort of habits moving forward and the generations coming, and we think about what Gen X wants to do and how they think and their need to have more of a direct dialogue with their fund sponsors and more of a stake in understanding the total return, both economic, but also impact and community returns and how there's alignment in their goals and the way they want to live. we think this is going to be a growing sector of the market. So, we're wading in, we're learning, and we're starting with this first Jamestown Invest product. But we think it's going to be an important part of how people invest in real estate in the future.
Fascinating. That's really interesting because you've not been able to do it here until recently.
Right.
So I'm fascinated to understand more about what I think of now. And you're the first person to actually articulate this in all my podcasts. Actually, anybody I've spoken to that has said they have been raising money online for real estate anywhere else. So Germany is a kind of case study in a way. So tell me what you see are the dynamics there of a country that has allowed digital marketing to raise.
So I wouldn't say they're not raising digitally. Our German business raises through a very traditional intermediaries through banks and sales partners. So it's a very analog system, but we have 65,000 investors over our history who have invested with us. And so we think that will come in Germany as well. We're piloting it here in the US because I think this is a market where we feel like we can take that step without challenging a system that works very well currently in Germany. So we are focused on non-accredited investors. So it's a $2,500 minimum, and it is really about anyone from 25 to whatever age being able. It's democratizing the access to institutional real estate. And so this new Jobs Act legislation, which allows these Regulation A products that can direct invest, that allows people to direct invest, seems like a good place to do it. And we've decided to almost exclusively raise this through social media channels. And so it's an incubating slow process. And it's iterative, right? I mean, it's about testing and iterating about messaging and about call to actions for transactions and all those things. But so far we found it really an interesting process.
Michael, you're blowing me away actually with this. It's absolutely fascinating for a company your size to take this kind of step. So you're doing a Regulation A, Reg A plus, and of course in the news just the last few days is that's going up to 75 million, although there are ways of amplifying that, as you well know anyway, right? Basically. Right. But you are taking this step into the digital world. So let me ask you then, the plan is to go directly to non-accredited investors, right? That's the point. You log on, you can buy shares into the fund online. Right. That's how you're going to do it.
Yes.
And all right, so so understanding that you've had this experience in Germany, but in Germany, so it is different because in Germany, you have a network of intermediaries. Here they might be RIAs going to accredited investors. Now you're going straight to the consumer. Why? Why are you doing that though?
Because we look at our workforce and we look at the generations coming, and we know that they have a need to be in a greater dialogue. They want to speak to each other. They want to validate their choices. They want to have a sense of their investment managers sharing their value system, that the return is more dimensional than just financial, that it includes lifting communities and having impact on people's lives. And so we think that long term, having that direct dialogue will be meaningful to the investment, to the generations investing behind us. And so, we're planting the flag now. I guess we're one of the first institutional real estate firms thinking this way. We don't necessarily think this becomes the biggest piece of our business in the next few years, but we think it's a great kind of starting place.
It's absolutely fascinating. So, you've said a few things, and whenever you see my hands doing this and you can hear me tapping away, it's because I'm taking notes. That's all. So what has been since you made this decision to move, and there's a few things I want to share with you actually based on conversations that I've already had. You can listen to the other podcasts, actually, they're quite interesting. But what has been, once you made this decision to go to basically everybody in the country to invest in your fund,
Right.
what were the biggest challenges after that to figuring out, what comes next?
Well, I think, I would say since it's such a new space, I think navigating the compliance piece of it is really challenging because as a business, we have to, as a regulated investment advisor and with several layers of compliance going here, we have to be very mindful of underselling what we're doing while we're communicating who we are and what and how you can engage with us. So I would say that was the first one. I think understanding how to create messaging on social media channels that has the appropriate sort of storytelling aspect of who we are and why we do what we do and how we do what we do and what we're focused on, but at the same time being transactional in a way that people say, yes, interested, yes, answering the questionnaire to get the qualifications to be an investor, and then yes, I'm investing and I'm sending the money. And so I think that's been very much a learning process for us and really satisfying. We've had 100,000 unique visitors on our website in the short time we've been doing this, and we're converting about 1% of those people to investors, and that's certainly a great response rate. And in our ecosystem, we have about 900,000 people that are communicating with us, and so we think as this grows, that will be a powerful tool.
Well, those are some huge numbers. So, okay, so you've described a few factors here, but on day one, you didn't have any kind of system in place, right? You decided you're going to go into it. You called a few lawyers, right? They told you about compliance and don't say this, but do say that, and et cetera, et cetera. But now you got to figure out how to get your message out there. You've actually hit some very important key trigger terms: storyline, messaging, et cetera, et cetera. But how did you build a team internally, or what was the approach that you took to solving that problem from having no messaging to going forwards and doing it?
Right. I mean, well, we obviously have our fund and compliance departments in our main business, and that in a way, everyone sort of welcomed this as a new challenge to understand. But then we also have a 30-person marketing and creative group, and we have people who focus on digital media, and we have people who manage our digital channels across our properties. So in a way, it was sort of bringing all those teams together and being in the learning process together of how to approach that. And we hired some great consultants, and we have we engaged with the right advisors in that regard, but it's definitely test and iterate. Maybe I would say our first messaging was more lifestyle, and now we're starting to be more transactional, and I think you build on that story. So there'll be some of both kind of going all the time, and some of it's about how you communicate what the value add we bring to real estate, which is really a community-based focus on building mixed-use environments and strong office and retail environments and residential in a way that's unique and creates aspiration in an inclusive way versus the old line, which was aspiration in exclusive way, which counted, which sort of made you feel a little bit intimidated. And so our real estate focus is very inclusive.
So you've used this term actually that I think dovetails into this idea that you're talking about of lifting communities.
Right.
So is it your hope or goal, perhaps, that some of your investors will be investors in the communities in which you have properties, or is it more of a broader, you'll make money in real estate by investing with this idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally back to the concept of increasingly people want to have a multi-layered return to their investing. They want community impact. They want alignment with their value system. And so the idea that people can invest in the communities they live, or that it's real estate that looks and feels like what they want to engage with, or how they want to office, or how they want to shop, is at the base of this. And so, to start with, this first fund is focused in the Southeast, and that's where we have a strong base, right? But so the first asset is something called Southern Dairies, which is adjacent to other assets we own in the market, and is an adaptive reuse sort of office project. And for those people who live in the market, they can understand, they can see it and touch it and interface with it. And for people who live in other places who can't, they can understand it. And it's something that they see in the markets that they live in. And so yes, I think there's a direct connect to the idea that you as an individual can have access to institutional quality investments with professional managers, and it looks and feels like something that aligns with your value system, and that we as a sponsor are providing opportunities for people in those communities to be entrepreneurs and to make contributions in ways to green space and public spaces that aligns with people's value systems.
Fascinating. So you're describing a very deep level philosophy, right? Value proposition. And for the people listening to this podcast, that's exactly, makes sense. It resonates, right? We understand that. But when you're talking to a Gen Xer, one has to use different kind of language, right? You have to break it down into different levels. What is your process for creating the content that explains this philosophy, this value proposition at a granular level that's understandable to everybody? Sure.
So we have consultants who are in the response media space, right? That are engagement, transactional media. But then we also have focus groups of real people who we work with, and people inside our organization, and we test and iterate, and then we go back and forth to compliance and figure out what the message is. And then we put it into Instagram or Facebook or out into the distribution channel with direct emails, and we see what kind of open rate and response rate and transaction rate. What we've been told from others is that the pipeline, has a series of days that is on average, and we've been tracking, are we ahead or behind that? We have a goal of what we think the average investment is, and what the minimum investment is versus the average. And so far we're tracking above the average, and our investor transaction rate is much quicker than we were told it would be. So we're seeing that the actual engagement and reaction point, it's speaking to people in a way that is meaningful. And so that's been an interesting process.
That is interesting, actually. So are you guys actually able to track first contact on social media all the way through to signing a check?
Yes.
And do you have, at some point in that, is there human contact, or are you seeing investors go through your entire funnel without actually speaking to somebody internally, so you can track it all the way?
So we have a live connect, customer service people, but we're seeing right now, a significant number of people going through the investment funnel without talking to somebody. And that, I think, is part of what I would say is Gen X, the way that group wants to interact, right? You want to be able to go on your PDA and book a plane ticket, manage your IRA, go, figure out your utilities bills, your online banking. It all kind of exists in a way that it reduces the friction of the interaction. And so that's a goal for us. And a challenge is how to provide everyone with enough information and enough comfort that they feel that they can transact.
And so how do you meet that challenge? It's with content, isn't it?
It's absolutely about content.
Yeah.
And I think it's about, again, I say testing and iterating that content. You see what's the open rate, what's the click-through rate, what's the, sign up for email for more information. How many times do you send communications post their first engagement? How quickly do they fill out the questionnaire? And I think all of those things are metrics that help us understand if our content is doing what it should do.
And what have you found, Michael, has been the most successful avenues to filling your funnel and getting those conversions? What form of marketing so far?
Well, I think certainly, press and media is something that's very powerful, because I think it kind of gives you exposure to new people who don't already have a relationship with you. But I think certainly the stories of our tenants, the stories of our community engagement has been really well received. And I think also the call to action about kind of how you can invest. And I think also having minimums for institutional real estate that really weren't available to individuals. You could invest in mutual funds or you could invest in REIT shares, but you couldn't really kind of have this direct experience at a reasonable level.
And the minimum, your current minimum is?
2,500.
2,500, you did mention that, right?
Yeah.
So I want to tell you something that I discovered before. But when I was asking actually about the most effective method, so you've described the kind of communication or the kind of content that is well received. And it's very interesting that you described that. But I was wondering, what were the social channels? What are you finding are the most effective for what you're trying to do? Is it LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter?
It's definitely, it's LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. I mean, those are the ones that we're focusing a lot on. And, I find Instagram fascinating. I personally am addicted and think it's great. And so I think if you understand, the level of engagement and how people are spending time, and the ability to have a very clear contact with people who are interested in and engaged in investing in this kind of product through geo-targeting and algorithms and that sort of thing, you get immediate response, right? And that is sort of what's different than it used to be.
So now you're also focused on Gen X. So I'm a millennial. That's what I like to tell my students. I'm just really, really late blooming millennial. But Gen X comes after them, right?
Right, yeah.
So this is a very young group of people that you're aiming for. So this is presumably, right, because early career professionals.
Yeah, and I think it's people who are digitally native, right? I think that's a key piece, right? Like, what is it that, I think that really is the top edge of digitally native is maybe 40, 45, I wouldn't even say that's digitally native, it's digitally enhanced, right? And digitally native is 30, right? And so I think within that, there are people who are in their mid 20s and there are people in their mid 50s or 60s, right? I think that it skews on either edge, but the goal is people who are actively engaged in a direct way in their investment future.
And they are investing relatively small minimums. Have you ever thought of reducing it even further in order to, so we build tripwires, right? So we do the same thing, except primarily to accredited investors. In fact, almost exclusively for accredited investors. And a tripwire, as you well know, but for the one guy that's listening that doesn't know, it's a small sale. And somebody that makes a small sale early in their relationship with you is 10 times more likely to make the big purchase later down the line. Is that something that you've thought of doing, or is that $2,500 entry level kind of your tripwire?
Yeah, we see 2,500 as that. I mean, I think that's the minimum, but our average investment has been significantly higher than that. And so I think that, if you sort of say, some people are investing 100,000 and some people are investing 2,500, you kind of get a case of where that, of how people are thinking about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I spoke to Harold Hofer at Rich Uncles, and he was on my podcast. I asked him the same kind of question, and their minimum when I was talking to him about it was $5. I imagine that, a $5 minimum.
That's amazing.
And he didn't actually articulate it this way, but I thought about, what does that mean? You're going after this very young group with this basically no decision really necessary. Right, it's $5 to buy real estate.
That's right.
What I thought, and you're on the same track, is brilliant actually. If you look at this younger audience, one of the biggest issues that people have, not biggest issue, but what they say about the younger generation, Gen X, even the millennials, is that they will never be as wealthy as the baby boomer generation, right? That the baby boomers had all this, and now it's much harder to buy a home, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what occurs to me, especially for people like you, if you have a long-term perspective, is that by getting those folk engaged now at small levels, that generation, millennial and Gen X, will inherit the wealth of the baby boomer generation. And so if they invest $2,500 today and $25,000 tomorrow, when they inherit $250,000 or $2.5 million, right, in 10, 20 years time, they're going to have had an interactive relationship with you all that time.
That's right. That's right. I think I think you framed it in an interesting way. I think our goal is to prepare ourselves for the future investing generations. I think you're going to see, an increasing sector of people who don't go through mutual funds, who don't go through pension funds. I think that that will still, of course, be there, but I think there's a group of people who want to have a direct connection with real estate. And maybe as people are not going to own there are going to be as many homeowners in the future, this is a way for them to have a real estate investment while they're living in a more shared, transitory kind of way. That speaks to kind of what their value system is, but they still get to have a root in real estate investment.
Well, this is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go ahead, but this is basically the idea of democratizing real estate, right? Because now you have a population of people who can't afford to buy a home because prices have gone out of whack, lending has changed. So now you're going to have more of a down payment. So they're really missing out on that opportunity to build wealth through real estate until guys like you show up, right? Basically.
And I think, the thing is, institutional real estate is a great wealth creator throughout history. And so I think if you look at people's sort of fundamental, sort of portfolio balancing, I think it's a valuable place for people to invest and to be able to do it in a way that reduces the friction of the experience. Many people were surprised by that, but some people don't want to go talk to their investment advisor who looks like their father and talks to them in a way about needing to be more responsible and that sort of thing. They want to make their own decisions and connect in a meaningful way to people who they share their values. And so it's certainly a gratifying place for us to be starting a business.
Yeah, and they also want to be able to interact, on their phone, right? They can
That's
make,
right.
If they, right?
Yeah.
Now,
And they want to be able to do it from an airplane seat, when they're traveling, and from a dinner table. It's just not during 9 to 5 business hours, right? Just when it makes sense for them and when it's convenient for them.
Well, this is it. One of the ways that I pitch my business, right, which is to basically put these systems in place for sponsors, is that, look, you've been doing it all these years in person, raising money in person. Trust me, I know you don't want to do that anymore, but
right.
Your investors don't want to do that anymore either, right? They don't want to meet you for lunch. They're sick of that, right? They're busy with their own life. Send me, give me some good content online. Let me come to your website.
Right.
Let me learn from your website and educate me on social media when I'm there. I've got something to do. Tell me what's going on. That's how investors want to invest.
Right. That's right.
Now, in what way do you articulate some of these ideas that we've been talking about, right? Institutional investment and the ease of communication. How do you articulate, or do you use that to entice, is probably the wrong word, but to educate investors as well that they can invest with the benefits, for example?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would direct you to our Jamestown Invest website and, sort of walk through it, and you can look at sort of how that works and look at our social media online. I think that's across our channels. I think you can see a variety of different engagement models in that regard. But I really think at a base, it's about providing people with clear, transparent facts and understanding the value system of who we are as a sponsor, and providing them access to know about us, and to visit our website and to engage and to download materials. And I think that's people are used to doing that. I mean, people are doing research. Everything starts with a Google search, right? Like, before we go to dinner, we search what restaurant we're going to go to. Before we buy a car, before we, toast in the toaster, we figure out what the best, way to do it is. And I think that's how the new process is, whether you're 60 or you're 15, right? I mean, we're all doing the same thing now. And so we forget that the iPhone is only really 10 years old. Right? We can't imagine a life before the smartphone. And I think it's become ubiquitous to everything we do.
With young kids, I'll tell you, Michael, I'm constantly trying to imagine a life without the bloody iPhone. I'll tell you that, and the iPad. I can remember it. I'm sure I gave my parents the same kind of grief over TV that they give me about the blooming screen time every day, but it's a constant.
That's right. That's right.
So do you guys do any traditional media advertising as well in support of your digital marketing?
We haven't done really yet. I mean, you mean print and newspaper and that sort of thing?
Radio advertising, for example?
We haven't done yet, but we have done a little bit of banner ads on digital print, newspapers and that sort of thing. All sort of digital so far. We're really trying to stay true to our mission, which is to interact digitally with people.
Which is the best way to do it, Michael. I'm gonna sign off.
Okay.
If you don't mind, with 3 sign-off questions for you. I would love to sit and talk to you some more, and I do have a couple of questions once we go unofficial.
Okay.
But I got some sign-off questions that I ask all of my guests And eventually we'll create a book or some kind of series on it. All right.
Yeah.
So here we go. So the first question, you've been doing this in setting up this program for a while, but most of my clients, or a lot of people, don't know even how to start. A lot of developers and sponsors, not as large as you, but a lot don't know how to start. So for somebody just starting out syndicating real estate online, what would be the most important thing you think they should keep in mind?
Good question. I think it really is about understanding. They should immerse themselves in how people consume information and content online. And it's funny, I was in a room with CEOs and I asked them how many were on Instagram, and almost without fail, they all said, "Oh no, I don't have a social media footprint." And I said, "Well, how many of you have Amazon Prime accounts?" And they said, "Oh yeah, yeah, of course we have that." And what was different is that one that they saw as a service to them was consuming goods and services, and the other they saw as vanity or some potentially exposing themselves. And so I think what is interesting about understanding how people interact and what the social network is and what the rules of engagement on the social network of Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and that sort of thing, I think is an important thing for somebody you have to love it. If you don't love it, you're not going to be good at it. And so I wouldn't say go in and start raising money online if you're not online, right? Get somebody who is and listen to them, because that's part of the challenge, right? So.
But it's intimidating, Michael, to go from absolute zero. When I first started doing this about 5 years ago, I had spent most of my life actually paying companies to get me offline. Right? I figured if I hadn't told them myself, I don't want them to know. It's a big step, and it actually doesn't take that much. You do have to enjoy it, you're right? But once you put it in place, every piece of content that you put out there becomes an asset to your company. You got to think about it from that perspective as well, right?
Also, I find some of the most interesting books I read, I learn about on Instagram, on people's feeds. Some of the most, the restaurants I go to, the products I buy. I think that there's something to be said for a connected world. Now, there's downsides to that as well, but I think that's embracing it is I think part of the future, right?
Second of my last three questions. What has been, and you said you've been in the business, whatever, your company, 37 years in Germany, right?
Right.
So that must have been somewhat before you were born, actually, judging from the looks of you, actually.
Thank you, but no, I'm 51.
You don't look it. You might have done 10 years ago.
Right.
That's what my dad says.
Right.
But anyway, hardest lesson that you've learned online personally. It's been the hardest lesson in your online world.
I think the hardest lesson is just in regards to our business, or in regards to just personal learning online.
Yeah, personal experiences online. What's like? I'll give you an example to just without putting words into your mouth. But some people will say, bad reviews or trolls, or having a thick skin, or time management, or what is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I guess I would say from a I think that fact is not always there, right? And that that there is a certain amount of just noise in the system when people are all doing what they're doing, right? So I think the hardest lesson is understanding what is real and what's not real. And I think that's obviously, I mean, on a personal level, I would think that's probably the most significant thing.
Yeah,
news feeds, as we know today, news feeds are all very complicated. So you can hear anything you want to hear on any channel you want to tune into.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When I grew up, if it was in the papers, it was absolute truth. Yeah, it's in the paper, right?
Yeah.
Today, gosh, it's very difficult. And so cutting through that noise from a business perspective and gaining people's trust is a challenge, right?
Yep, that's right.
Final question. Your personal key daily habits to being successful online.
Personal daily habits to be, I mean, just loving to consume content. You learn so much about what content is being created and about what you like. And so, I'm an early riser. I've always been an early riser. So, I start my day with the papers first, and then I go right to Instagram and pay attention to what my feed is presenting. And I have a very varied feed, from architecture and design to finance and business to travel and leisure. And I think that gives me perspective that's much broader than physically I can have.
Michael Phillips, President, Jamestown Properties, JamestownInvest.com. Thank you so very much for being a wonderful guest on my podcast.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
I really enjoyed talking to Michael. They have a huge opportunity to educate an entire generation of Americans about the benefits and wonders of investing in real estate. Of course, the biggest benefit of educating people online is that when it comes time to raise capital, right, when you step across that line from education to actively soliciting investment, you now have a wiser, better educated audience, which not only makes it easier to raise money, but also ensures that your investors are knowledgeable and well informed. Find out how to build your own world-class digital marketing system so you can raise money online as well. Be sure to watch the whiteboard workshop on the podcast page for this episode at gowercrowd.com, where I walk you through the entire system. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Mr. President Michael Phillips of Jamestown, for your time with me today. That's all for this episode. I'll see you next time. And for now, this is Dr. Adam Gower signing off. And here it is again, as promised. Securities are offered through North Capital Private Securities Corporate Member FINRA SIPC. Jamestown's portfolio of projects is not representative of Jamestown Invest One's investment strategy and the scale of investments the fund intends to make. An investment in Jamestown Invest is illiquid, involves substantial risk, and there is potential for loss of part or all of investment capital. Visit www.jamestowninvest.com/OC for more information and the full offering statement.